Protected Tech presented by KYZEN, where we will explore common cleaning questions and answers. Let's get started. I would like to introduce KYZEN's own Will Sweet.
Thanks, William. And thank you all for attending what will be a pretty short talk on combination chemistries. So cleaning and corrosion protecting of ferrous metals. And essentially what that means is it's being done at the same time. So these combination products are two-in-one products, which I'll be getting into a lot more later on in the presentation. But as we move forward, we're going to start off with preventing corrosion, the old school way of doing that. We're going to move on to the new school approach, which is the bulk of this presentation about combination chemistries. And then finally, why use one? Why would you want to use a combination chemistry as opposed to the old school approach of preventing corrosion? So a common enemy around the world, and that is corrosion. So, corrosion, at least in this context, equals ferrous oxide, which equals rust. So throughout this presentation, I am going to be kind of interchangeably using the words corrosion and rust. But since we're only talking about steel and ferrous metals here, that corrosion is rust. So leading causes of corrosion, humidity and moisture. If there's humidity and moisture around your parts when they're being made or if they're being washed, you're probably going to experience rust or corrosion. It's also worth noting that there is moisture in the air. So really, there's always going to be some amount of humidity or moisture around the making of your parts. Elevated temperature, especially when you're forming screws, the temperature is very elevated around your parts. So same in the wash as well. You're usually heating up baths to at least 120, if not 140 or 160 degrees Fahrenheit. So you're always dealing with elevated temperatures. Catalysts, so chlorides or sulfates that are mixed in with everything, and several of those elements are in oils. So there's typically a catalyst involved as well. Time, so how long it takes for rust to occur. If you're not protecting your parts immediately, rust can develop on certain alloys very quickly, within seconds, called flash corrosion. So time is also something to consider, in the season. So during the summer months, there's a lot more heat, a lot more humidity in the air, especially depending on where you are in the world or in the country. So season is something to always pay attention to. And typically, there's going to be more than one of these working together, if you couldn't tell through my explanations. You don't need all of them, that's for sure, but typically there's several of these working in conjunction. The old school way, so how to prevent corrosion formally. Completely remove all soils from the part. So, that means cleaning, so getting off all excess oils, soaps, anything, especially existing corrosion protectors. So you want to have a completely clean surface finish. And then you're going to move on to applying the actual corrosion inhibitor. That can be done in the wash and or the rinse. Formally, it's really just the rinse. So you clean the part, you move it over to the next stage, and then you protect it. We'll get more on the wash, or we'll touch more on the wash later, because that kind of has to do with combination chemistries. And then provide proper contact time. So you can't just put a part in a spray washer for 5 seconds and expect it to be completely protected. You have to have enough time for the machine to spray and apply an equal amount to the entire surface of the part so that it is all protected. And then it's also important to note the specific type of metal that you're going to be protecting or that you're processing. Steel, aluminum, brass, copper, etc. Many of the materials that are compatible with steel are not compatible with aluminum. So high alkaline products cannot be used on aluminum or they will darken. And Phil Tomasello will be talking more on that in particular here in a couple of weeks. And then finally, package properly. So after the part is cool and dry, you can use desiccant packing materials or VCI bags to completely seal the parts away from the environment. That is the best way to ensure that your parts are never going to rust. Moving on, this is just a simple diagram of what a wash system can look like. So you have your wash section, a rinse section, and a dry section. You can either do these applications, obviously, in spray or immersion capabilities. I think this is just a very clean example of what we're going to be talking about throughout the rest of this presentation. between a wash and a rinse. And typically, the old school form you can see in the number 2 section, the rinse, is the RP or the CP, essentially rust prevention or corrosion prevention. That's typically where that is applied. It's in stage 2 in the rinse. But moving on to combination chemistries, essentially it is a 2-in-1 chemical product. So you're going to be able to clean with this product, and you are also going to be able to protect the part from corrosion with this same product. You're looking at short to medium term protection. So what that means, anything water-based, so anything in a cleaning system that is using water-based materials, you're looking at medium to short term protection. If you want anything longer than, I don't know, say 3 months or so, you're really going to need to go with an oil-based product in most cases. So note that this is mostly interim protection before the next stage of the process. Typically, these products, these 2-in-1 products, are alkaline-based for oil removal, oil, grease, other materials like that from the parts. And what is left behind is a dry film. Typically in the rinse, so again, going back to that diagram, the concentration is lower than it is in the wash. So think about it this way. You can have, if it's a really tough to clean part, you can run high at 7, 8, 10% concentration to clean that part. And then in between stages, it's going to be protected because this is a 2-in-1 product, cleaning and protecting. But you only need to protect the part for a week. So when you move over to the rinse, you don't need 8 to 10% to protect the part. So you can put simply 2 or 3% in there to potentially get you that week's worth of protection. Types of corrosion inhibitors. What we're going to be talking about, or what we are talking about through this whole presentation, is aqueous, water-based. So you're always going to have a dry film, like I just introduced in the last slide. There are other types. So there's oil in water emulsion, which is a wet film that can be in spray or immersion processes. So, I mean, the surface of your part will be wet if you use something like that. Further, there are oil-based corrosion inhibitors, another wet film, but it is simply oil. So if you don't want your final product to have oil all over it, then that is not the type of corrosion inhibitor that you should be using. However, it is probably the most effective for long-term protection. If you need to protect your parts for several months, even a year, if it's going on a barge to be shipped overseas, this is probably the best way to do it. And then finally, there's also solvent-based RPs or CPs that are used in, say, vacuum degreasers or vapor degreasers as well. CP effectiveness, corrosion prevention effectiveness. There are a number of ways to test this. Obviously, the most tried and true way is to simply wait. So process your part, clean it, and protect it, and see how long it takes to rust. It's best done in, say, the manufacturing floor, because that's the actual environment that the part is going to be in for most of the time. But if you don't have weeks or months to wait to see how long it takes for something to rust, something that we do in our lab is use a controlled environment chamber or a humidity chamber. And what this does, in the settings we use, is we have this chamber, we heat it up to 90 degrees Fahrenheit, turn it up to 90% relative humidity, and then because of that, and through all the calculations we've done over the years, that in a normal warehouse conditions will give you basically a 9 factor. So if you have a part in there for 10 days and it doesn't rust, you can be comfortable with saying that in normal warehouse conditions, the part will not rust for 90 days. So that's kind of how we speed up testing and test the effectiveness of how well something is protected from corrosion. So finally, why should you use one? Why should you be using one of these combination products? One of the main reasons is it prevents flash corrosion. I alluded to that earlier in the presentation. So you're using a cleaner with built-in inhibitors. So the final rinse concentration is what will protect it long-term or medium-term in simple terms. So again, even if you clean the part in 10% in the wash, but you have 2% in the rinse, you're really being protected with 2% corrosion inhibitor. It's important to note. but there's still that 10% that's protecting it in the interim between the wash and the rinse cycle. So there should be no flash corrosion in between stages. You're able to reduce wash temperatures or gradient the temperatures. So again, if you need a lot of temperature to clean in that wash section, you can do that. You can heat it up to 165, 170, however high you need to go to get your parts clean. But then you can cool it down in the rinse, because you don't need 165 or 170 to apply the corrosion inhibitor that is in that 2-in-1 product. So you don't have to keep everything as high as you might in other cases. And then finally, it's going to keep parts wet. As long as the part is wet with chemical and CP involved, it's not going to be rusting. It will need to be dried before it's moved on to other steps in the process, whether that's paint, whether that's further processing, what have you. But all in all, it's going to prevent the quick rusting that you may see in some of your other processes. Further, it's going to eliminate any carryover risks. So especially in immersion systems or tank-to-tank systems. So you have a part that's going to the first stage, and then it's being drugged to the next stage, and then dropped into the next tank. That's commonly referred to as drag out. So whatever liquid is on the part coming from the wash before it goes to the rinse is going to be drugged over into the rinse section. The beauty of these 2-in-1 products is you're dragging the same product from the wash to the rinse, so you're not going to be contaminating the rinse with something else that shouldn't be there. So the only thing that you'll have to monitor is the increased concentration, because you are going to be dragging over a little bit extra chemical into the rinse. So over time, the concentration will start to rise. However, there's also no issue with monitoring those concentrations. So typically, if you're dragging in the old school approach, if you're dragging over a cleaner into the CP tank, you now have two chemicals that you're not able to differentiate between when you're checking concentration. But now you're still looking at apples to apples. It's still the same stuff that you were tracking. So even though you still are going to have some drag out, you're not mixing two different things. So you're able to monitor it much, much easier. So simplicity. That's the main driving force for all of these combination products. It makes everything much more simple. You're just using one product for the whole cleaning and the corrosion protecting. And in conclusion, why buy multiple products when you can get the job done with one? It's as simple as that. You're eliminating potential variables. You have one thing that you're working on, and it's simplifying the entire cleaning process. So you have one thing that you're looking at, potentially lower concentration in the rinse is probably the biggest variable that you will be dealing with. And that's simply a chemical saving, so you don't have to run as high in the rinse. And then you're going to get results, probably cleaner results than you were in the past with the old school approach. Then moving on to the frequently asked questions on this topic. Is a dry film CP specific product more effective at rust protection than a combination product? And the answer to that is actually more simple than you would think. No. So what we do, especially with some of our products, is we have the same CP package that may be in a CP specific product and in a combination product. So once you dial in your concentrations, it can be just as effective as a CP specific product. Moving on, are there any extra maintenance steps to implement when using a combination chemistry? This one is important. So typically, I'm sure if you've used any water-based corrosion inhibitors in the past, you know that there is more scale built up in that CP tank. And that is because CPs are designed to coat whatever it comes in contact with, to protect whatever it comes in contact with. So that includes the inside of the machine where it's being sprayed. So if you're spraying, now you're bringing CP material into the wash tank, that means you will have increased scale buildup. So just as long as you know that going in, you're paying attention to the scale amount that is built up in your wash tank and taking care of it with PMs, washing out your machine and stuff like that, it won't be an issue. But just know that you will have slightly more scale buildup in your wash tank if you're using a combination product. You talked a lot about ferrous metal protection. but could I clean non-ferrous parts in the same process? Short answer, yes. Slightly longer answer is that you need to be careful with which product you're using. Because again, high alkaline products do not react well with aluminum and some other of those non-ferrous parts. So you need to make sure that it is a lower alkaline or mild alkaline combination product if you're going to be bringing non-ferrous parts into the mix. And that is all I have for you, so I will pass it back over to William.
Thanks, Will. And thank you guys for watching this Tech to Tech session. If you would like to discuss this topic further or have any questions not answered in this session, please contact your local KYZEN regional manager or send an email to tech@kyzen.com, and we will have someone follow up with you as soon as possible. And if you like this video, be sure to follow us on our social media platforms for more expert cleaning content.